Hello listeners, and welcome to Season 3 of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host Casey, and this season we're diving deeper than ever before. Having completed my Masters in the Psychology of Coercive Control at the University of Salford, we'll be exploring not only the hidden world of cults, but also the expansive influence of coercive control in various settings. This season involves sensitive themes and discussions with survivors of coercive environments. Listener discretion is advised. If you find these topics difficult or disturbing, please visit cultvaultpodcast.com for links to supportive resources. To enhance your listening experience and support this work, consider joining Patreon at patreon.com/thecultvault. Members get early access to ad-free episodes, exclusive goodie bags, merchandise, invitations to our monthly video calls, plus a special shout-out for supporting the show. You can now link your Patreon account to Spotify, combining free and exclusive content, all in one convenient place. Don't forget to support the show by leaving a review on your favourite podcast player. Every review helps us reach more listeners and expand this community. And for true crime enthusiasts, CrimeCon UK is returning to London on June the 7th and 8th, 2025. It's the ultimate event for anyone interested in leading true crime guest speakers, book signings, and CSI experiences. I'll be there too, and I'd love to see you there. You can use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, at the checkout for 10% off your tickets at crimecon.co.uk, or you can follow the link in the episode description. Now, with all of that said, let's dive in to today's episode. Hello, listeners of the Cult Vault podcast. My name is Casey, and I am your host. Today, I am joined by a new guest on the show who is going to be diving further into a subject that we have covered before, but with so much more information than I could have imagined. And I am so happy to welcome to the show Hannah. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, how are you?
Not too bad today. So excited to have this conversation and really blown away by the amount of information that you've provided me about the Way International, the group that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking in a semi-anonymous capacity, so there's some things I can't ask that I normally would. But the Way International, would you break it down?
The Way is a very high control Christian group. They have been around for quite a while now. Their founder, Victor Werewolf, started his organization in 1955, and they're still going now. They've had various iterations of the Way, and you would see them as basically people that, as you see a lot of evangelical Christians, they pray a lot. They do a lot of what I would call Christian virtue, signaling a certain appearance, a certain type of approach to the world, very positive, and they really kind of, toxic positivity type of group. But mostly they're Christian, and that's what you would see when you would meet them. They would just be like, oh, we're just happy Christians. So that's what you would see if you first met someone from the Way.
From some of the things that I've read, it's really a combination of different Christian practices or teachings. So there's like some Calvinism in there. They've really thrown everything in a bowl, mixed it all together, and used a little bit from every playbook, including the way that they print publications and the way that they don't have traditional churches, but they have lots of meetings and congregations for annual events. So there's so much to this. There's so much to this cult that I didn't realize, and I don't even know how to ask you to begin really giving us an insight into how deep this operation goes.
Well, it does go very deep because it's a very highly structured organization. So think of something like the military or even the Catholic Church or a bureaucracy. They are very highly structured. And that's a way of controlling people as well, because everyone had a very clear idea of what their role was in the organization. And so when Dr. Werewolf was he called himself doctor, but when he was the leader before he passed away, he, often made references to military structure. There was a whole, put on the armor of God. Those quotes were always used. Also, just the type of training that he developed and the type of chain of command, that everything was to come from him, and then it was to the leaders, and then, down to the cult members. And so he was very controlling about making sure that his teachings were being followed, that only the teachings and the things that he wanted researched were being researched. And it gets really interesting when you start to look at mainstream Christianity. There's thousands of references about the way, but about them being both, pretty much just rejected by mainstream Christianity because of their really unorthodox beliefs, like not believing in the Trinity. So there's just so many references. Like, I was shocked myself when I went online and started doing this research, just about the thousands of different articles over time that have been written, and the references made to the way as being a high control group or a cult, and completely rejected by mainstream Christianity. If you want to know more about how they function, like in terms of actually, like, okay, so when you're a believer, you go to a meeting at someone's house. They have no churches. Then from there, you will go to a class. From there, you will go to a program, like a ambassadorship, which is just basically a missionary. From then, you go into the Way Corps, which is their leadership program, which is even called a corps, which is a military word. And then they have, then above that, you're a leader or other things. The money also flows in the same direction. All the money flows upward. It's always given at every meeting. Money is collected, and it's all given to the headquarters, which is in Ohio.
And then there are things called TWIGs as well.
Yeah, Twiggs, when the werewolf began his program, he decided it needed some sort of, and this was kind of clever, some sort of like visual for people to understand, and he chose a tree. So the twigs were the meetings, and they're the very tips of the, tree. Then it goes into branches, then limbs, then a trunk, and then the root. The trunk and the roots, of course, were the very top leadership, because they were where everything was flowing from up in the case of a tree. So, yeah, that is what they called them, twigs. But they have since abandoned a lot of that terminology, that particular terminology. But if you read their other publications, that's pretty much the only thing that they got rid of. Other than that, they still adhere very closely to Dr. Werewolf's teaching.
And after he was no longer in leadership, he was replaced with somebody who was equally as problematic.
Yes, he raised up at that time, he was the person training, teaching, and raising up all these people to be leaders in the way. And so the person that he chose was someone that he had trained very carefully. And his name was Craig Martindale. And that happened in 1984. But Craig Martindale had already been established to teach the Way Corps. So he was already very familiar to anyone who was a fanatic, anyone who had been in the cult for very long. And so then we haven't even got into their problematic teachings, but we can talk about that now if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely, please. I just wanted to make the point that all the leadership are not elected but chosen by current leaders to be in leadership positions. And I thought that was an interesting thing that I'd read in some of the documents you sent over. And of course, all men in leadership positions.
Right. There is one person, a woman, who has been on the board or been with them for many years, but she was also a close ally and confidant of Werewolf, so she carried on. And, these cults cannot exist without women because they need wives and children to fulfill the kind of belief system that they have. So there are lots of women, and recruiting women into the cult is very important. because they need women to have children so they can have more members. And so, but they also need people to recruit more people, which is really the most important goal of the cult of the way, is to recruit more people. There's no other purpose that I can see, because they don't help people. They have no anti-poverty programs. They have no hospitals. They have no schools. They don't really do anything other than sell their teachings, sell their classes, sell their publications, and collect money from their followers.
So how is it that you first came to learn about the Way International?
Yeah, I can totally tell you. I mean, and this is really common, I think, for people who are in the Way. You're in the Way, especially once you are in the Way core, you are expected to recruit a lot of people, especially your family. And there is there's kind of a directive that you don't want to be with your family, especially if they have never done anything with the Way. But if they do, you want to keep that door open, because they might want to join the Way, or they might want to take the Power for Abundant Living class, which was the main class that Wierwille taught for many, 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 many years. And so you just always keep at them, kind of. You keep at your family. You keep telling them, oh, I'm so happy, I'm so blessed, and then quote some Bible verses. And, you want to keep them, you don't want to keep them, you can't be like you are with the family now. You would share all your secrets, you would share all your intimacies, the things that you care about. That's not the kind of relationship that they want you to have. They want you to have a relationship with your family. If they are in the Way, and if they are not, you are supposed to be recruiting them. So my brother was trying to recruit me for several years. He started recruiting me, I think, when I was 17. And he was already in the cult. And then I went to my first Twig meeting in Kansas, where I was living at the time. And Kansas was a big, kind of a hotbed for the Way at that time. And I went to my first Twig meeting because my brother suggested I go, and he gave me the people's contact information and everything. And so that was in August of 1982. I remember it very clearly. So yeah, that's how I got involved. And it's really common, like I said before.
And after you go to your initial Twig meeting, you've mentioned kind of how the classes work and how people kind of become more ingratiated with the group. Is it standard what happened to you after your first Twig meeting as it is for others who are recruited by the Way?
I think they have a pretty standard projection of where you will go. So you will take the class, like I mentioned before, then you'll be a member, and then you might take some of the more, make bigger commitments, or you might not. So that's. But I think it's different for everyone, depending upon how pliable and how easy they are, how suggestible they are to the Way's techniques. So I think, for me, I was already a very religious Catholic. I was already a very, I would say, committed to my own faith at that time and I had been. And so to me, it seemed like, okay, well, I didn't really feel that the church was answering my questions anymore. So I thought, well, there'd be no harm in going to a Bible study, is kind of how I looked at it. So, it would seem just so innocent at the time to me, that I was like, oh, I'm just going to go to this Bible study. And I think for a lot of people, it probably is that way. And everybody may have a little bit of a different reaction or a different trajectory. But eventually, if you stay with them, you're going to believe it all.
With your knowledge of Catholicism already quite strong at the point where you went to your first Twig meeting, how long was it before you started to question the Way's teachings in kind of comparison to the spiritual teachings you'd been brought up with?
Well, one of the things that the Way and other groups do is they tell you that if you didn't find the answers in your previous church or whatever it was that you believed in, we can answer that now. We're going to give you the true story of how Jesus, spread the word or whatever it is, interpret the Bible, and they make you, they're very confident. as you know, a lot of people who are in high control groups become very, your brain kind of changes. So you're extremely confident. You're extremely well-spoken. There's nothing that is going to disturb you if you're having a debate with someone. So when you're young, like I was, that felt like, oh, well, these people are really sure of what they're talking about. That makes me feel sure that I feel like, oh, well, they must be right. And I always had questions in my mind about their teachings because it was so different than a lot of the teachings I had had. But because this young man was recruiting me and we got into a relationship immediately, I just became way more involved immediately than, I probably would have had that not happened.
And the teachings of the organization or the cult, do they change the more involved you become? Is it kind of like the love bombing stage at first, and once the group feels like you're secure in your standing with them, they start to reveal a little bit more about the true practices of how the cult is run?
Yeah, I think part of any hierarchical and very high control group is that they do have a hierarchy also of secrets and a hierarchy of control. And the more that you submit, the more steps you take towards them, the more control that they have over you, but you also have to submit to get to those higher levels. So because my brother was in the Way Corps, he knew a lot of things, and the people that, were recruiting me for him would tell me things because they assumed because he was in the Way Corps that I was more committed, I was more, I don't know, they just drew me in really quick because I was a family member and because I was also smarter and, just had more just more aware of things. And, it was pretty exciting because whenever you first get into a group like this, it's always really exciting because it's something new. It's something, they're very positive. Like I said, it felt very uplifting. And I really wasn't in that place at that time. So, yeah.
So you mentioned before that the Way disproportionately target women so that there can be women recruited and children born into the group. Is this really just down to the sexual and reproductive coercion of women and to produce more children for the group? Or is it because it sounds to me like a playground for men to run around in and just pick women to have non-consequential sex with, at least for them, non-consequential?
Or, yeah, for them, it's even like, women are told it's a blessing because men are sexually satisfied and able to focus on spreading the word. And that is the most important thing. I think they would probably disagree with the characterization that women were targeted. But when you look at the numbers, it just seems very clear. I've collected a lot of research, and online there's tons of information that the Way had published for the Way Corps members, especially during the 80s. And one of them is a letter that they sent to women who could not find men who had graduated from the Way Corps to marry, because you were only supposed to marry other Way Corps members. It's a hierarchy thing. And it said that it gave them the criteria by which a man would be acceptable for them if they were not a Way Corps. So it went to that control and that level of control. And there was also a time when I was supposedly engaged to someone, and Craig Martindale told those people that they couldn't be engaged when they were getting ready to go into the Way Corps. So he broke off his engagement with me specifically because one of the Way Corps men told him to. I do agree, though, that the part about the playground, because they talked in a very kind of like maybe a coarse 70s type of way where, it was the beginning of the sexual revolution. We're hot for the word. Our people are hot. And seems very strange now, but you see a lot of that kind of performative Christianity online now. but they were like kind of ahead of it. They were like the bulwark or whatever. And so they did think, they did understand that all these people were young. And of course, when you're young, it's easier to recruit you as well. But that, people are, sexually active when they're young. And I think that the leaders knew that. And in particular, Werewolf had a penchant for that topic. And I even in my research found that he just was trying to discuss open marriage with some people that he met in the Jesus People movement when he went to the Haight-Ashbury in 1968. So these are like old themes for him. He definitely believed that you could have sex outside of marriage as long as you were in fellowship with God. Two committed believers could have sex, and that was fine. So there was a very open attitude towards sex. And it definitely skewed towards the men because it's a patriarchal group. And the men are in charge of everything there. So, of course, they got to pick the women they wanted to be with, and the women that they wanted to be with in general were pretty excited to be picked by someone who was a leader.
With the setup of open relationships and so much sexual intercourse happening between members of the Way International, there are likely to be complications around sexually transmitted infections, but also a lot of intercourse resulting in pregnancies because of encouragement to stay away from birth control.
Right. Yeah, I was told by the person that recruited me right away, we started having a sexual relationship, and I was told that birth control was not acceptable. So then I went off birth control, and then I got pregnant, and then right away he was like, "Oh, you're going to have an abortion." And, that was very shocking to me, but I thought I was in love. It was shocking to me because of being grown up Catholic, a young man in the Catholic Church would have definitely married me, and I would have had my child then. And so yeah, this was happening to other people as well. And there are also other stories of women who didn't even know who the person was because they were having multiple sexual partners. So it's pretty heartbreaking because, first of all, when you're young, you're just naive. Well, you're ignorant of a lot of the consequences that can happen to you in life, and you think you're invincible. And these young people in the Way definitely believed they were just invincible, that God was protecting them. And the Werewolf had a particular belief that he said that about abortion, that if a baby hadn't taken its first breath, then, that's when it actually becomes a sentient being. So, when you're talking to a young person like myself, I just really didn't, I just did whatever this young man who recruited me told me to do. And I was not mature enough to really understand the consequences of what was happening to me.
That type of abuse and reproductive coercion is always such a difficult theme when it comes through during these conversations. And I know through losing pregnancies that it stays with you for the rest of your life. So it makes me angry, and it makes me riled up, especially when you've mentioned that the Way International have attempted to kind of reform or rebrand and move away from the old teachings, but it really just looks like the language has changed, but the practices are pretty much still the same. So it's difficult to know how many women right now are being coerced into having abortions. But on the flip side of that, encouraged to have children to remain in the way and then deployed to recruit other people into the group. It's kind of like the younger members and those who are newer to the group. You people shouldn't be having children yet because you're going to go out and recruit and make more money for the group. And once you're a bit older and you've been with us for a bit longer, we want to actually secure your place with us by telling you now's the time for you to have children and bring new members that way into the group.
Right. It's like you can't win if you're a woman, basically, because you're going to be either told you can't have children now or you must have children later. And then when the other part that's quite insidious about when you do have children, first of all, they don't want you also to have children. Not only are you supposed to be recruiting, but how can you give them money if you have a child to support? And that is another one of your major obligations. It's almost, your first obligation. And so that is, and then when you do have children, you're supposed to then raise them up in the way. And there are stories online of people who've been raised in the way, and I've communicated with some of them. Then those children are, you give them to the way when they become of age. And that is why I decided to tell my story, because my friend in the way, at 60 some years old, her and her husband were told to come back in, to go to training, and then they had to move away from their home that they'd been in for 20 years. At least 2 of her children, I know, they gave to the way. And when I saw that a couple years ago, I was just literally so heartbroken that this is what prompted me. Because it doesn't, if you stay in the way, it does not matter. They will find a way to get your money and your children over time. Because they believe in, unquestioning loyalty. And the people who are running the way now were actually people that were taught by Wierwille and Martindale personally. And so they still have all those teachings, plus they have all the experience, and they know the history of the organization. So, yeah, if you're still in the way now after everything, then yeah, you're pretty much committed completely. You're never leaving.
And the financial exploitation of members within the way, it doesn't just boil down to handing over properties and going out to recruit in order for the way to make money that way. There's financial exploitation at almost every level within the group. And I wondered what you could tell us about what happened to members who couldn't meet the organization's financial demands.
So my experience with that has been basically that when I was in the cult, I was giving them at least 15% of all the money I made. So basically I had no money. I was 20 years old, working. I was very poor. I didn't understand why I was so poor, but it was because I was giving the cult so much of my disposable income. I don't know anyone who has personally been kicked out for not tithing, but I do know that the control goes to where you are spending your money, and that's how they keep you on the right track. Is because one article I read, a couple had bought a new truck, and the way Twig Leader told them that was wrong, that they should have told them in advance. It's that kind of exploitation. It's telling people not to get mortgages. If you have a mortgage, telling them to sell your house. It's telling them, not to buy anything, like have any kind of debt, no student loans. Like they told people, I read one directive from Craig Martindale where he said, if you are going to medical school and you want to become a doctor and you need student loans, don't do it. So they were telling people not to get educations. They were telling people, so the control was a little insidious. Also, the fact that the Way Corps had to pay their own way through their Way Corps training. So it's basically like, you're going to go work for the Way, but you have to pay us for 3 or 4 years. And now I'm sure there's people who have been let go from there as well without paying if they weren't paid. But they also like to keep all that very secretive because, you know, they don't want people going out complaining about the way. So they tell people, you know, don't tell people what we're saying to you. You're one of us, you're in the Way family, and, you know, this is family business. So don't tell them.
That the same line that they would use to tell you to leave everything to them once you'd passed away as well. Leave it to the family. Leave it for the family.
Yeah, I read about other people who who gave their life savings to the Way, but I don't know the pitch on, like, you know, doing your gift, you know, for when you pass away. I don't know what their pitch is. I didn't stay in it long enough. I'm sure it was, I mean, all of their pitches is that if you don't give money, you won't be financially successful. It's a typical prosperity gospel, like, you know, line, because it's very common now. Like I said, once Werewolf was kind of at the tip of the spear in terms of that and the prosperity. It was like, you have to give. They called it abundant sharing. They probably still do, because you're giving of your abundance. But basically, they want you to have no disposable income and be completely dependent upon them. So, I mean, that's my translation of what abundant sharing is.
In terms of the teachings of the Way International, they do have their own publication company, their own printing company. I don't know how much it prints now, or if it's changed its name to what it was years back. But when you are in the Way, are you encouraged to only read publications that are printed by that company?
Yeah, you're really only encouraged to read the Bible and any publications that the Way approves. Some of those might be books that, like in the Way Core, there's a reading list you can find online that a Werewolf was giving to the Way Core leaders. And sometimes the Way will find a book that is also agrees with some particular aspect of their belief system, and they will have them read it. One of the most, I think, worst examples of the books that Werewolf was asking the Way Core to read was The Myth of 6 Million. And The Myth of 6 Million is the book that says that the Holocaust really wasn't that bad. So those are, yeah. So you know, that one, I got to tell you, even when I was in the Way, I was shocked, because I had already, you know, as a young person in America, during that time, we were living, you know, still in the shadow of World War II. And the Holocaust was very real. And I had even seen Holocaust survivors speak before. So I knew they were real. So there was just, you know, sometimes these things that they want you to read, it's part of, you know, getting you more indoctrinated, becoming more loyal. And the Werewolf wrote a long series of books. And I don't know if they're still on their website, but their publications are quite important to them, and because they are a business. And so they do need to sell those books. So yeah, they want you to read either those books or the Bible. No literature, no media, magazines, none of those things would be acceptable. And so, but it's also fun, it's also money making. So it's like a two-pronged thing. They get people, you know, ensconced in that environment. They believe everything. They're reading all this material, and they're also making money off of them, because, you know, you have to tithe, but you also have to buy their material.
Right. And when I think of the Way International, I think of the radio show that was started in the earliest days of the Way International. And when I would first start hearing about this group, I would be told, oh, it's the group that had the radio show. So that's kind of as far as I thought things went, until I started to have conversations with people that had experienced the Way International firsthand, such as yourself. There would be people discussing how there aren't church buildings, but there are houses people go to. And even when there aren't church services, there are radio shows people can listen to. And when there aren't radio shows people can listen to, there are publications that you can read that are printed by the Way International. So it really does start to become an all-encompassing thing when you consider that there are trainings that people can go away for, and there are annual events that people gear up for, and it's the biggest day of the year, and it's, you know, it's bringing in all of that counterculture stuff that you mentioned with the age of free love and rock music and Haight Ashbury and all of the things that were really influential during that period in history when this group was up and coming. And the teachings of Wherewell and Martindale had an impact on people that would splinter off from the Way International and start their own groups that followed the same guidelines. So I wondered if you could just tell us a bit more about those groups that have come as a direct result of the Way International.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with them. Since I've been doing my research. I do know that when I was in the Way, I went to Montana, and as part of being moved around, I call it the trafficking part of the Way. And the person that was the head of the state there is this person named Steve Sand. He's known now. He started his own splinter group, and I think it was in Montana or in California. But the thing that's interesting about him is that being a con man, just like Wherewell was, later went to federal prison because he figured out a scam where he could add a small charge onto phone bills. They used to call it, I think, slapping, where you would look at your phone bill and there'd like be an extra charge for a little, like a voicemail service or something. But so he, I think it was like just not that long ago, like in the mid 2000s, 2010s, was just in federal prison. His ministry was a failure, obviously, because he had to go steal money instead of. But part of the cult is that you're constantly on this grift. You're never working a real job. You're never doing things that actually matter. You are just doing work for the cult and collecting money from people who will give it to you. So in terms of the splintering, that's the main one I know about. But I'd like to make a comment on the environment that you talked about, because I talk about this a lot now, because Wherewell was also kind of ahead of it in that you mentioned like all the ways that you could, access the teachings, create a whole environment. You have music. One of the things you didn't mention was they recorded a lot of their teachings on tapes. And so we listened to a lot of cassette tapes. That was a huge part of the teachings back then. So there would be music tapes that they would record. They would sometimes cover a song. Like I remember Celebrate by Kool and the Gang. They put some Christian words to that one. They would also, so there was music, there was these teachings, there was these books, there was everything. It's a whole environment. You're supposed to just be enveloped in this whole, environment of the quote unquote word. And also that includes you are only supposed to socialize with people in the Way. Because once you get outside of it, people start commenting, oh, isn't that a little extreme? Oh, you're not on birth control. Why? So they don't even want you talking to people outside of the Way. One of the hardest things for me was I'm still friends with some of the people I was friends with before I went in the cult, which I'm very lucky. My friends are really nice people. And one of them recently told me, she said, yeah, you told me that when you went on your WOW mission that you couldn't even come home if one of your parents died. So she was remembering that I had told her that. And it made me so sad. I felt really bad. It was really weird because I hadn't even thought about talking about that for a long time. And, that just reminded me that they just create this environment where you can't even do the normal things that you would normally do, which is if someone was hurt, you would go to them. No, that's not acceptable. So that's, I think, more important than the splintering, because I think it's interesting that the splintering happened around 1987. There was a schism, and at that time, a lot of this information about Dr. Werewolf being so obsessed with sex came out. And some of those leaders used that as part of their reason to splinter about his weird sexual mores. So that was an interesting thing that I read as I was doing my research.
You mentioned that you were out doing your WOW, and I wondered if you could break down for the listeners what that one stands for.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the phases that you can go in, which is pretty high indoctrination. You're going out for an entire year with usually they had 2 men and 2 women with a team. You're assigned to a place that you've never been before. You're supposed to go there, get a place to live, get a job, and only, and then witness. So basically, you're supposed to work 20 to 30 hours a week, and then the rest of your time, you're supposed to be recruiting for the way. So it didn't matter where you went or what you did. All of it was involved with recruiting or meeting up with other people in the way who might be in that city as well. Yeah, it's a very bizarre kind of way of getting people quickly indoctrinated, because once you're with people like 24/7 and you live with them, then you're like on each other. You're checking each other. Oh, is this person doing this thing right? And so it becomes reinforcing system of keeping people in. I was fortunate. I was in the way. I was my WOW ambassador was in Atlanta, Georgia. But I was fortunate that the people I was with were actually really nice. Later, I realized, 2 of them were in love and other things. But I was so young and so naive that I couldn't really see things clearly. But that's what you do. You just basically recruit and collect money for the cult for a year. But they make it sound, really important. Word over the world.
World over the world. Okay. Yeah.
World. Yeah, it's like it's like their slogan, and it's on little banners. You'll see it throughout the way, just that is their ultimate goal, is that once the word is over the world, Jesus will come back, and then there'll be this terrible thing, the planet will burn. That part I don't try to focus on the theology and the beliefs as much as what the people do, because that is a better indication of the character of the group. Because a lot of people have nice beliefs and will say a lot of nice things, that are related to the Bible or whatever religious text, but it's really what you do that matters. And they do a lot of really awful things to control people.
When did you realize that you were going to leave this cult and return to life outside of the Way International?
Yeah, I hadn't gone anywhere. I had been, closely with. Hadn't really gone anywhere since from August 82 until August of 84. I was with them constantly. And August 84 is when we came back from our WOW mission and went to the Rock of Ages. And it used to be that the Rock of Ages was the Way's giant festival that you mentioned, that they would have once a year, and all the quote-unquote believers would come, and there would be a lot of teachings, but also the WOW ambassadors would both leave and go on to their mission, and they would return, and they would have a pinning ceremony. And so I'd been there, and then in August, we were at the Rock of Ages. And so then we went to Montana, because you just keep moving. Once you're in there, you just move with other Way people. It's like once you're in the group and you're living with them, whether it was WOW or you have just decided to live with other believers. So I went to Montana. And that was with another group of believers. And I went up there, and that's where I met Steve Sand, the preacher who became the federal convict. So I was there visiting, and so then I decided, well, I could go visit my parents at Christmas, because I hadn't been back and, to visit or do things in like 2 years. And so they said, okay, you can go and then come back, because by then I had already been with them for 2 years and 2.5 years almost or whatever. And they were like, okay, that's fine. They were willing to let me go visit my family. Plus, they did want you to maintain that relationship in case you could recruit them later. So that was important. And so I went home for Christmas, and I was seeing my friend, the one I told you about, that I had been friends with since I was 14, and some other people. And it just really occurred to me that I just didn't need them. I just didn't need the way. I had people, I mean, my parents are pretty messed up, but they still, cared about me. And I had a lot of other people in my life who really wanted me out of the way. And I wouldn't have known that had I not gone home. And so I just never went back. I just decided to leave. Yeah, I just totally did not go back. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask anyone. I just said, I'm not coming back. And then they were like, oh. And then they just sent me my stuff later. I don't remember if there was any attempt to try to get me to stay. I have no idea, because I was just so, I think, excited to be free from them. So, yeah, and that was December of 1984. So I was so lucky that I listened to, myself and not to them anymore, because I knew that I just didn't really need them. And by the summer of 1985, I was already in college. So I immediately just moved forward. I did not look back. I did go to a couple of meetings, but I just never felt like I needed them anymore. And so because of that, I realized, oh, okay, I'm at this meeting, but I don't need you. So I never went back, I stayed in touch, and I stayed friendly with everyone. That was interesting too, because I never had a really big falling out with them. So no one, so then I was able to kind of stay in touch with some of the former members, especially after the age of social media. And that was interesting because they were all really nice to me, and we never had to really have a, well, this is crazy, kind of moment, even though I would politely try to discuss things, periodically.
So you were able to escape. You had your things returned to you at some point. That's not a story that you hear too often. And I'm so glad that it happened in a way where you weren't drawn back in, where you didn't have to say, whoa, but my passport's there and I'm going to have to go back and get my passport. And just one thing that could have just kind of, ensnared you back in. Or kind of slowly reeled you back in again into the way's teachings. I'm sure that there are other people who have things a bit more tied up in the group. I suppose if you get married within the group, if you have children within the group, that is a thing that would complicate matters in terms of leaving permanently.
Yeah, totally. I think that I was very fortunate in that I left so soon, that I kept polite but minimal ties with the people, including the person who I was supposedly engaged to. His sister and brother-in-law ended up being friends of mine, and I stayed in touch with them. And honestly, I blamed myself for getting involved with them and for letting them, treat me the way that they did. But I was very glad. I feel very fortunate. I mean, it definitely took things away from my life that I will never get back. I mean, there's kinds of trauma that I will never recover from completely, but I got to go on with my life, and I didn't have to be with them anymore. And I don't have someone constantly looking over my shoulder to remind me to follow this rule or this Bible verse. So I feel very fortunate.
There certainly are people, as you've already mentioned, people that are dear to you that are still involved and are tied up with the Way International in a way that makes it increasingly more difficult to find a way to escape that environment. And the extent of the Way International's human rights violations, as I would say, the extent is far more reaching than just the Way International. When you consider like the River Road Fellowship, for example, where former follower of the Way International disagreed with some of the teachings, but took the principles of the controlling elements from the Way International and started River Road Fellowship, in essence, or so it seems, to just abuse women and young girls. And I know from the document that you sent me that that's not the only case where the Way International followers or people in leadership have left to kind of duplicate or replicate that abusive treatment that happens to women within the Way International.
Right? Yeah, there's a very strong... Let me put it this way. You will never forget, if you were in the Way International as a woman, that you are second to men. You will be constantly reminded that men are head of the household. They're head of the church. They're head of everything. And you are taught that you are supposed to respect them because of that. And literally that is the, it's like a tautology. It's like you respect me because I'm a man, because the Bible says that I am supposed to be respected because I'm a man. I mean, there's no real reason. No one has to follow any sort of behavior, yelling, criticism, abuse, gossip, all very common. People don't talk about things. There's a lot of secrets because you don't want to be criticized. I know that one of my friends in the Way a few years ago sent me a message on a platform, and it was like, I think people are secretly crazy. And it was like a meme, and I thought it was funny. But then I realized later this person was probably having a mental health problem, but didn't know how to tell me. Was having some type of mental health crisis. But in the Way, there is no mental illness. There's only devil spirit possession. So you're fighting yourself constantly. And those principles of control, they definitely sink in. And anyone who has been in the Way for very long or has left the Way, they often will demonstrate, you'll see the evidence of that control in them. A lot of people who were in the Way but no longer follow them directly, when you look online, they will talk about how great Werewolf was. Still, even if they aren't even in the Way anymore, talk about how great he was and what a good teacher of the Bible. So he really did sell that part of of his project so well to his followers that yes, people like Bernard, people like Steve Sand, John Lynn, others started groups, and they were essentially based on exactly the same principles. I mean, there was nowhere else for people to go once you've been indoctrinated into this belief system. There are some people, I think, who have left the Way that consider themselves more mainstream Christian now, and they wouldn't agree with the things that were taught to them. But there are very few that I'd seen, unless they're like myself or other people who are educated about the way that churches work, or who are educated, period, who understand, how deeply his indoctrination went, to the point of, even when people left to start other groups, they were basically the same group with, their own flavor, which each cult leader has their own flavor. Yeah.
There was certainly something in the air in that part of America in the 60s and 70s during the Jesus movement, the Jesus People movement, where charismatic men decided that free love was going to be their particular flavor of religious proclamation, and the harm that it has had on societies all over the world is probably, I imagine, unfounded at this point, and we'll never really know the true extent of the harm that those teachings have caused. You mentioned the Rock of Ages briefly earlier on. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to say about that particular event.
I do, and the first thing is that the Rock of Ages was just like modeled after like Woodstock. I mean, the Rock of Ages was supposed to be the big, the Jesus Woodstock, I think is how people thought of it. And so people come all over the country, from all over the country, gather, and they would have a tent city, and they would set up, it would sometimes, like 20,000 people. I mean, it would be a lot of people. I'm probably underestimating it because I don't, like I said, I'm more about like the things they do, less about like all the, I'm not a way historian. So, you know what I mean? I'm more about what they do than like the history of the way. And so every year in August, they would have this big event. And that was one of the ways that, Werewolf was able to attract young people, because it was exciting. It was fun. You were staying out in tents with everyone. Everyone was praying, and I'm sure having tons of sex, because it was just, there was just no one saying not to. In fact, and Werewolf either explicitly or, reading between the lines was saying, that's okay. You guys are young people, and we want you to be, satisfied so you can move the word over the world. And so that went on it would go on for several days and culminate in the last night. And that's when the WoW ambassadors would leave. So you had all these people, including families there, praying, doing all the werewolf stuff, and then sending this group of ambassadors off. One thing that happened, after I left under Martindale, was that he became really obsessed with persecuting gay people, with persecuting the LGBTQ community. And I was just shocked. And so he actually canceled one of the the whole Rock of Ages. He canceled the WoW ambassadors because he said that they had been infiltrated by gay people. And, he was so disgusting. Honestly, I would read some of the comments that he made, but they're so inflammatory and so disgusting. I really wouldn't even want to offend anyone who just heard those words, because, that was his big obsession, was he thought that there were homosexual devil spirits in people, in a lot of people. Apparently, I have no idea how he got this information, but, he was brainwashed. So, but interestingly enough, the Rock of Ages is now coming back. So, they, like I said, they had been after Martindale was fired, and he wasn't fired for alleged sexual abuse. He was actually sued for sexual abuse and found guilty of it. And when he was fired, they did try to reform. They have tried to make themselves seem more acceptable. And they've had a lot of success recruiting overseas. So it's a really common thing. Well, they found, like other evangelicals did, that it was very fertile ground for the way, because also there's a bit of the kind of like patriarchy in those countries and other things that kind of just automatically fit in with the way. And so now the way is having their big Rock of Ages again, with all these new members who weren't at the old way, who weren't taught by Werewolf and that, but the person who's in charge of the way is still that person. So it's a very interesting, and I think kind of slightly frightening thing that they're upping this Rock of Ages, because they're going to bring whatever 20,000, 50,000 people to New Knoxville, to the farm that Werewolf turned into the headquarters of the Way International. And I just think that that's terrible for the people who go there and have to be a part of being so controlled and told that that they're fighting against regular people like you and myself, but that because Satan is in us. It's just sad to me that many people will be there and hearing those types of teachings and thinking that they are, so set apart, that they are another human being even, because they don't look at other people as human. And so I just wanted to say that for all the former way people, they are having a Rock of Ages in 2025. And, we should talk about what we can do to use it as an opportunity to talk about the way as being a high control group, financially exploitative, that, how can we tell people, how can we get this information out to other people so they don't, what happened to us doesn't happen to them.
Right. And I guess the prospect of having a Rock of Ages show with all of the effort that goes into it, I'm sure, kind of that's where the modern slavery element comes in, where people don't get paid for putting together a show that's probably going to make the cult a significant amount of money and possibly new recruits as well, or just embolden people in their beliefs in the teachings of the way. It indicates that even though there's been issues with previous leaders who have been proven to be involved with crimes and scandal, that the reforming and the rebranding could actually be working, that the numbers of the way are staying the same or growing if they're bringing back something that kind of died off a few years ago and is now making a comeback. It suggests that the Way International is still a strong presence in the world. Maybe that is in itself a marketing strategy or a PR strategy. Maybe they are doing it to save face because things are so great in the Way International in terms of numbers. That's what I would like to think. But I'm an idealist and I always hope that these groups are going to come crumbling down. So we'll have to wait and see. And we're coming to the end of our conversation today, Hannah. I know that you do write about the Way International and sometimes about your own experiences. I hope that it would be okay for me to share with the listeners anything that you do post when it becomes public, if you were to share with us where people could find that and I could let listeners know in the future.
Yeah, I do have a Substack, and I don't even know what it's called. I'll have to get the name of it back to you. But I do want to say that, I'm not the only person out here talking about the Way. You've had people on your podcast, and I think that there's been people on other podcasts as well. But I do think that they are being successful. I've read quite a bit about their operation, particularly in Kinshasa. It's in Africa. And, they have a whole Way headquarters there and a huge facility. I think, though, if you've studied anything about the Central African, the Greenbelt countries, and the explosion of evangelicalism there, you would say, oh, well, that's just part of that. That's what I feel like, instead of the Way being so successful, that they kind of they're in there with a trending kind of thing that's happening and has been happening for a while. Werewolf did fancy himself as being an international, teacher, although he was never had the kind of credentials or associated with the types of biblical scholars that he mentions. The other thing is that I'm going to be coming up with some writing about the Jesus People movement, and there are people in the Jesus People movement who claim that Dr. Werewolf was the reason that they broke up because of his heretical beliefs, and his obsession with sex, of course, is part of his heretical beliefs. And so I have a piece that I'm working on about Werewolf's impact. And another reason why you never hear about him, they just made a movie about the Jesus People that was released here in the United States last year, but there's no mention of him. Well, why? Because they all detest him and they all consider him to be a heretic. So that's what I'm going to be writing about next.
You say that you're not a Way International historian, but from what you've sent me and what I've read, I completely beg to differ.
Well, I'm a historian. Actually, that's what my degree is in. And so because I am a historian, I look at things a certain way, but I don't believe that in this, for this particular topic, I need to know all of the dates like you would in if I was going to write a history of the Tudors. I'd want to know more about the dates, right? And all the times, the people that were born. And that's a type of history, but the type of history I do is more like a social history, more like an intellectual history, the history of the idea or the history of the event. So that's why I don't say I'm not a historian of the way.
Well, as soon as we know the name of that Substack, I'm going to be sharing it with the listeners. I'm sure that there will be some individuals that listen that would love to read more about your experiences, but also just more about the Way International itself. And those former members of the Way International that tune in, or maybe even current members, who knows if they will find that writing interesting if they haven't come across it already themselves. So thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us today. I so appreciate you coming and sharing the things that you've experienced and the things that you've been able to learn since that experience regarding the Way International. I just wanted to ask you if there was anything that you would like to say to anybody listening that may be a former or current member of the Way International before we say goodbye today.
Yeah, I'd like to say to the people that know me, who are still in the Way, that I still hope that you can leave. I believe that you can recover and you can have a beautiful and fulfilling life and not be afraid. And I hope that you find your way out. And if you need me, you know who I am and you know where to find me. And for the people who have, like myself, left, I'm in solidarity with you. And I think about you. And I want you to know that I know it's not easy, but we can thrive. We can be the people we are meant to be. And I really care about you.
That was really beautiful, Hannah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to more of your writing. So we'll keep in touch, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Okay, thanks, Casey. Good to meet you.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.